Hello world, welcome back to the Razor RC, and today we are going to be talking about shocks specifically for the Traxxas 10th scale line of vehicles. So this is going to apply to the Slash 4x4, Stampede 4x4, Rustler, Bandit, Haas 4x4 like you see in front of us. So pretty much all the 10th scale lineup, all the 4x4s, all the two-wheel drive vehicles. So I've actually spent a lot of time racing like a Slash two-wheel drive and have a full series on that. I also used to race a Slash 4x4, had it set up perfectly for the track. But I want to talk about the best shock upgrade for your Traxxas. And this will apply whether you're doing some racing, some bashing, huge jumps, all that kind of stuff. And I just want to talk about some characteristics of the vehicles and some shock selection as well. So in front of us, you can see I've got my Haas 4x4 and a pretty good vehicle, a little pricey, but honestly, kind of the only real weakness of the 4x4s is the shocks. So you can see in front of us, we've got the plastic stock shocks. These are called the Ultrashocks. Really cheap set of shocks, honestly. Plastic shock bodies, plastic caps, really small bore shocks, really skinny little springs, not a whole lot of spring selection. Big weakness is that the shock shafts do tend to bend, so when you crash these things, those little shock shafts bend, the shock caps can pop off. Just not really very good shocks at all. Not a whole lot of travel as well. This is the front shock, and then you can see we also got the rear shocks as well. So these shocks have been around for a very long time, like over 20 years. They came out, I think, back in the 90s with the original like Bandit and Rustler. And what Traxxas has done is basically carry over these shocks through the year. So every time they released a new vehicle, whether it be the Stampede or Slash or Haas or whatever, they just kept using the same shocks. And so yeah, a lot of weaknesses with these shocks besides being cheap and easy to break or bend. They do use preload clips. And then the main other issue that, not discussed very much by other people is that these are really just buggy shocks. They're really short shocks, especially the front shocks are really small for modern day vehicles, really short in length because buggies in general don't have a whole lot of shock travel. They generally run really short shocks. So because they've carried these out, basically through the years, through the last 20 years, they just keep reusing them. All the modern day vehicles, even things like a Haas, which really should have a longer shock in the front, they still got these really short buggy shocks. So I just want to talk about what the best shocks are in my opinion. So there are other options from Traxxas. They also make a big bore shock, which is the exact same as the Ultrashocks. They're just aluminum. Do not buy those. There's no reason to buy them. They're not really an upgrade over these shocks other than that they're aluminum. So that is not a very good option. What you can see on my particular vehicle, I actually have the GTR shocks from Traxxas. These are very good shocks. I'll put down the part numbers in the description below. I bought the blue ones, but they also come in gray. I think also green and red as well. So a few different colors if you like different looks. But yeah, these are the shocks I do recommend. And I'll talk about tuning them as well. Other shocks out there that are popular, Proline also makes a couple different sets. They make the Pro-Spec shocks, which are, not a bad shock, but very, very expensive. I think they're $70 a pair, so you're really spending about $140 as well. They also make the Powerstrokes shocks. I do not recommend buying the Powerstrokes shocks. They got the dual spring rate thing going on. I do not recommend getting that. It's going to be harder to find springs. They're also, again, really expensive. I think they're $60 a pair, so you're spending about $120 on the Proline shocks. Unfortunately, I don't think those are a good option. They are the right length at least, which is a good thing. I personally actually used to run TLR like race shocks on mine from the TLR 22T 4.0. Really good shocks, but quite expensive. You can find them on eBay sometimes for about $100 for a full set, but those are probably the best shocks you can buy. But honestly, for the average person, I would go with the GTR shocks. So talking about the GTR shocks, the nice thing, obviously they are aluminum bodied. They do have the titanium nitride coated shock shafts. They do have the bolted on shock cups here on the bottom so they don't fall off. Pretty beefy caps. They do use bladders as well. I'm more of an emulsion shock style fan, but the bladders actually work pretty well. And then they do have preload adjusters. Other nice things about the GTR shocks, obviously they're easy to find. Anywhere you buy a Traxxas, you can find your GTR shocks. They're really inexpensive. I mean, one set of shocks is $35. So a full set for the entire car is going to be $70. Now you will need to buy springs, and I would recommend some shock oils as well, and I'll talk about what shock oils I recommend. But yeah, they're really good shocks. They also use fairly standard size springs. They're 13 millimeter bore shocks, so you will need to buy 13 millimeter bore springs. I recommend the Techno ET line of springs. So Techno has an EB410 buggy and an ET410 truggy. They also use 13 millimeter bores, and they do have a wide range of springs. So if you get the front and rear springs, those are going to fit perfectly. They do come in a lot of different stiffnesses, even these fairly stiff red ones. I think they're like 5.2 pounds per inch of force. So a lot of spring options. For the rears, I would also recommend either red or orange springs. So if you're doing more just like off-road racing, off-road bashing, you know, more on the mild side, I would recommend probably getting the orange springs front and rear. They're gonna be a little softer, give you a little more traction on like loose dirt, that kind of thing. If you're running like in an indoor clay track, I think the orange is probably fine as well. They're not crazy stiff. The rears, I'm actually running Team Associated SC10 4x4 springs. They don't make this vehicle anymore, so it's really hard to find these springs. I'm actually running the yellow springs in the rear. So, but if you buy the Techno springs, the ET410 springs, you know, go orange, maybe on a loose outdoor type surface. If you're doing big jumps, if you're running on really high traction like asphalt, pavement, the road, that kind of thing, then I would actually go with the red springs, red fronts, red rears. Those are the stiffest that they make. Like I said, 5.2 pounds per inch of force in the front with the reds. The rears are going to be 3.2 pounds per inch of force in the rears. If you go with orange, they're about 0.2 pounds lighter on each side, but the reds are going to be a little stiffer, obviously let you land bigger jumps. So if you're jumping this thing, you know, like 5 feet plus high in the air, I would go with the reds. In terms of shock oils, I did play with the shock oils quite a bit, both in racing, bashing, that kind of thing. For bashing, big air, I would recommend 37.5 weight fluid in the front and 40 weight in the rear. Actually, you do want to run a little bit thicker in the rear because these tend to be fairly rear weight biased vehicles with the big motor, battery kind of more towards the back of the vehicle. If you're doing more racing, I would actually go 35 weight in the front and probably like 37.5 weight in the rear, somewhere around there. One thing that I think is worth doing is actually getting different pistons. So another nice thing about these shocks is that they are very tunable. They actually make a couple different piston sizes. So the front uses a smaller hole piston in the front. I think it's 2x1.5 if I remember offhand. And then the rears actually use a slightly bigger hole piston in the back. I think it's 2x1.6 millimeters. If you actually grab the front pistons, get another set of those and stick them in the rears, they will actually pack up a little better. With the bigger holes, it does tend to kind of bottom out a little bit more than I think is proper for this type of vehicle because of the rear weight bias. So going the smaller hole in the rear as well as the front will give you a little more pack, and then you can drop the weight down another 2.5 weight to again match the weight up front. So then if you're running the small hole pistons, go either 37.5 or 35.5 or 35 weight if you got those smaller pistons. So that's a nice thing about these shocks. So price wise, they're one of the cheapest options, and they're actually pretty high quality. The other thing I really like is they're easily available. You can buy them anywhere. And really the third thing that a lot of people don't consider is it's easy to rebuild these things. So they do make rebuild kits if you blow a seal on the bladder or the X-rings get torn, or if you just kind of want to freshen your shocks, you can buy those rebuild kits really cheaply. Even if you bend a shock shaft or lose a shock cup or something, you can just buy those parts really cheaply. So in addition to just being widely available, high performing, very tunable, they're also quite affordable and easy to get parts. So that's kind of why I recommend picking up the GTR shocks. Now make sure you buy the long front and the extra long rears. That's the correct size. There are some 4-packs out there that seem like they're a better deal. Those are not going to fit this vehicle. They do make different GTR shocks for like the TRX4 or the Mini E-Revo, but you got to buy the ones that come standalone, and you will need to buy springs. So I'll put links to all the parts that I'm using on these vehicles, as well as the weights and stuff that I'm running I think these are the best shocks you can buy, you know, certainly for the price, the performance, the tunability, and the ease of buying backup parts or replacement parts is really what makes these the winner. So pick up a set of these if you're looking for an upgrade for your Traxxas. So again, this will fit the whole 4x4 lineup, whether it be the Slash, Stampede, Haas, or Rustler, as well as the two-wheel drive vehicles, meaning like the Bandit, Rustler, Stampede, and Slash two-wheel drive vehicles. So I hope you enjoyed this video and this helped you out. If you have any suggestions on shocks, these is kind of what I recommend. Having tried a lot of different shocks and certainly raced and bashed the heck out of these things, I own 2 different Slash two-wheel drives and used to race them. I had a couple different Slash 4x4s and used to race them. I had a couple. I got the Haas as well, the Rustler. Owned pretty much every vehicle in both the 4x4 and two-wheel drive lineup, and do have videos as well on how to set these things up for racing. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. Look for more videos soon. Thanks for watching.